Hi, I'm Raj K, and today we're going to be doing some cool stuff with some horses and the R7. On my left here, we're at Boomerang Equestrian Centre, and we've got Lorenzo here, the beautiful horse, with Iona. And then on this side we've got Christy riding Nacho, which is possibly the best name for a horse I've ever heard. For this video, the lovely people at Wex have challenged me to go and photograph some horses. Equestrian photography isn't really my forte. I tend to do portraiture and product photography and that type of thing. But I have photographed some horses before. I did an editorial for some women's fashion brands, and there was a horse there called Gary. That's I'll show you the photos here. That was the first time I've worked with horses in a photography context. I used to ride when I was about 11 maybe, but I haven't really worked with horses since. Gary was quite easy to work with. He just wanted to eat the grass, and we'd kind of pull his head up for a shot, and then he'd carry on eating the grass, and we'd just pull his head up for a shot, and it was pretty easy. This time I'm going to be working with show jumping horses, although not in a show jumping context. We're going to take them to a cross-country club, and that is apparently quite different to a normal show jumping environment where it's a sort of mud dust kind of arena and there's jumps in the middle of it. This is going to be more big grass field with trees in between, and the obstacles are quite different for the horses, so they do kind of take a little bit of time to adjust to that. But I've chosen to do it at a cross-country club primarily because I think it will look a little bit better. I think the cross-country club will have more sort of greenery and trees that might make it a little bit more photogenic. So that's the approach I've taken for this. I've not done a lot of this before, so what I'm going to do is take you through my journey of learning how to do it while I'm shooting. And we had one day to film this, so it was quite a challenge. Initially we're going to shoot some action stuff, so we're going to use some high shutter speeds, freeze the action, and then maybe try some slow shutter speed stuff. And a little bit later I will go on to do some much more considered work where I am photographing them in my style. So I'm using some flash lighting, creating some portraits of one of the horses and one of the riders. So we are at Boomerang Equestrian Centre, and I've got the R7 in my hands. I put the 7200 2.8 RF lens on there as well. Obviously with the R7 that is at a 1.6 crop, so it gives us plenty of length and plenty of versatility to shoot. I'm shooting mostly at the wider end at 70mm on the lens because I don't want to get too tight. It gives me a little bit more flexibility around the horse, just in case I can't keep the frame perfectly on the horse. That way I get a little bit more space for cropping and a little bit more context, and show the trees and the arena a little bit more as well. I've set the camera up. I've got 2,000th of a second. I'm shooting at 2.8. The camera can keep up in terms of focusing, so I'm trying to keep the focus on the horse's head, but it might just jump to the body or the rider as well, which is totally fine. I think with this sort of focal length, we're not getting such a shallow depth of field that it matters too much whether it's on the head or the body. You will get all of the animal in focus. If you start doing much tighter shots, if you start going towards the 200 end, then you want to drop your aperture down. If you're shooting with a full frame camera and at higher focal lengths, you're going to want to drop your aperture down a little bit more as well. The ISO is on automatic. For the most part, I'm just letting the camera kind of deal with the changing light. It's broken cloud today, so it keeps getting brighter and darker, and depending on the angle I'm going for, it can be a bit dark in between the trees. On the camera I've set up continuous shooting. I'm using the electronic shutter on this, so I get the full high speed, which is crazy fast on this. I think it can go up to 30 frames a second. For focusing, I've got it on subject tracking. I've set it to animal subject tracking, and the eye autofocus stuff is on as well. And I've set it up to case 3 in the AF menu. And the reason for that is I want the tracking sensitivity quite high. Because the angles I'm going for, I'm having the horse come directly towards me quite a few times. With that sort of direct motion towards me, that's a continuous change of plane of focus. So I want the camera to be prepared for that continuous change. So tracking sensitivity should be slightly higher. Equally, when I'm panning with the horse and the horse stays at a pretty similar distance away from me, I want the tracking sensitivity a little bit lower so that the camera will ignore some of the obstacles coming between me and the subject. We spent quite a lot of time walking around trying to find suitable jumps with good backgrounds to try and give us a reasonable composition. These horses are generally show jumping horses and not really used to cross-country clubs, so some of these obstacles they've not really encountered before. So we have to take quite a gentle approach to introducing the horses to the obstacles and trying to train them into how to approach them and how to jump out of them.
Not the plan, though.
So in this case we're going for one that's kind of inverted, so you go into a dip and then jump out of it at the end. And our jockeys are just kind of introducing the horses to them gently and then trying to effectively trick them into using them. As you can see, it takes a little bit of patience and some gentle encouragement to get these horses to approach these new obstacles somewhat confidently. So you can see the camera's right down, right near the grass, and I can potentially get a bit of foreground interest with some of the blurry grass in the foreground. After that, it's just repetition, moving around and trying to find a good angle.
Oh, wow.
Oh God, this is really difficult, you know.
Oh, that's great.
I apologise in advance for some of the audio on this next section. We were under a flight path, so there were a lot of aircrafts going over. While we were out shooting at the cross-country venue, I wasn't able to show you how I set up the autofocus. So what I'm going to do now is show you a view of what my camera is seeing, what the R7 is seeing, and show you how the autofocus differs from anything else like the R5 and the R6. It is slightly different. So first thing is, if I hit the Q button, I am in servo, so we're continually focusing. And at the top here, we don't have a face tracking mode, which is something that you would be familiar with if you've had or used the R5 or the R6 or any other previous Rs, except the R3. Now, in this camera, what we can do is any of these modes we can pick, and we can pick our subject and track that subject. So it uses the focusing point as an initial start point. So you'll remember, if you've seen any of my other videos, I often go on about the initial start point setting on the R5. This is basically set up like that by default. It's much easier. So what we do is we press the Q button and then we hit the info to enable or disable the tracking. So if we disable that, it basically acts a bit more like a digital SLR. You put this box around your subject and you just hold that subject in the box. But if you enable it, what we're able to do is pick our subject and the camera tracks the subject. Much easier. The next thing we need to do is go into the AF menu. We go into AF and pick out subject to detect. So we turn on the subject tracking, but we actually pick out animals. Obviously we want people or vehicles. But this is where it's really handy, because in some situations what I want is actually the camera to prioritise the person. I want to prioritise the rider and not the horse. So depending on which part of the subject I want more in focus, I can pick the priority here in this bit of the menu. For the most part though, I'm going to stick it on animals, so we'll do that. Eye detection will enable that. Now you'll possibly know that on these cameras what we have is the an animal detection for birds, cats and dogs. But animals that look like birds, cats and dogs also kind of work. So what you'll find quite often with horses is that the horse's face is in focus and the eyes kind of got a box around it. We can pick out the subject. You'll see that the camera is kind of putting a box around the rider, or it's putting the box around the horse. And using the focus points, what I can do is I can put them on the subject and I can pick that, and then it'll jump around, it'll pick the subject, pick the rider, or it'll jump down to the horse as well. And it gives us plenty of flexibility to make sure that the subject is in focus. And I don't have to continually keep a box around that subject. It allows me just to let the camera do the work. I can think about composition then. So the next bit is, which case study do you use? So if you go to AF menu 2, you have 4 cases. And this is going to be quite important for particularly animals. When the subject is coming directly towards you, that's a constant change of plane of focus, so you want the tracking sensitivity on quite high. If you're tracking a subject across the frame and they're staying a kind of similar distance away from you, tracking sensitivity can be on reasonably low. And the reason you want this on low is if anything comes in between you and your subject, what you want is the camera to kind of ignore that. So if a tree comes between you and the horse, what we want is the camera to go, hang on, that's probably not what we want to focus on because it's a bit of a sudden change. It'll ignore it for a second, it adds a bit of a time delay, and then it will continue tracking the horse afterwards. Otherwise, it will jump to that lamppost or that tree and then try and jump back to the horse, and it really struggles to do that. So understanding these cases makes a big difference. There is a new feature on the R7 that allows us to capture images that we may have missed. So this would be particularly useful in a situation where the animal is moving in a slightly unpredictable fashion, or you don't know when the subject is going to come into frame. And often you will hit the shutter button and you've kind of already missed the moment that you're looking for. So if you hit the menu and we go into the camera menu, and in camera menu 6 there is a raw burst mode option. So I can go in here and enable that, and you'll see below we have pre-shooting. And as it explains there, the advantage of that is that while you're half pressing the shutter button, the camera is sort of spooling images for about half a second prior to a full press. So once you full press the shutter button, it will save that half a second of images prior to that. And when you're shooting at 30 frames a second, that's 15 frames it's just saved previous to the one that you thought you were going to get. So for some subjects that are a little bit more unpredictable, this would be really useful. What I found with the horses is that I didn't need to use this at all, as they are moving very predictably. So I can sort of get a sense of exactly when to shoot, because I know that they're going to be hitting the jump at a certain point. I can then start shooting with a raw burst from that point. I don't need the previous 15 frames. So you'll see on the screen here I am half pressing, and that bar on the left hand side starts to kind of build up a little bit. That's the frame of images that it's spooling before I take a picture. And then if I full press the image, full press the shutter button, you'll see that the buffer builds up. Going to go for a 50th of a second. At this point I decided to go for some slow shutter speed shots. What I've tried to do is create some motion in the images. We get some of that motion blur, and what we've got to do is we've got to pan and track with the horse and keep the horse in exactly the same spot in the frame, which is quite challenging. It does mean you have to repeat this a lot of times, and then hopefully you'll get a few. As you get into the rhythm of it, you will find it getting easier and easier. And certainly what I found is that with one of the horses, I found I was getting more in tune with the rhythm of that horse. So I was able to get more shots with one of the horses rather than the other. And it's kind of challenging because as the horse comes up to jump, he's changing direction, he's going upwards. So you've got to follow that motion as you're going with the horse perfectly in the same spot in the frame. Right, flash. Not every idea is going to work. This is something I tried and it just didn't work in the end. I'll show you some example images of what that looked like. We've got this lovely jump here between two rows of trees. It's a little bit darker. I tried using a bit of flash here, but it was just not powerful enough for the size of these animals. But what I have used the flashes for is to do a little bit of remote shooting. So I've got a R5 down there with the 600 EXRT flash gun on it. It's got a 1535 lens, so it's really wide angle. I'm going for that really nice wide angle from below perspective. But obviously I don't want to be lying down on the floor down there to get that shot. That would be quite dangerous. So with the flash gun on there and the STE3 transmitter on this camera, I can link the cameras. So that way, every time I take a picture on here, the R5 is taking a picture as well. That way, you know, I can be way back here with the 2470 getting some cool shots and then leave that camera to remotely shoot. And hopefully, we don't know because we haven't got confirmation, I haven't looked at the shots, but hopefully at least one of those with a bit of repetition would be a good shot. I pre-focus it so there's no autofocus. I sort of focus it on where the jump is and shoot at about f4.5, sort of 5.6 to give us a bit of depth on that wide angle. With it being so hot lately, I did find that the cross-country arena was incredibly dusty. So every time the horse did the jump, it kicked up a big plume. That then settled all over my R5 and lens, but simply blowing it off was good enough to get most of it off. I'm just going to quickly show you how to set up the linked shot feature of the 600 EXRT flash guns as well as the STE R3 transmitter, which I was using on my R7. So the transmitter was on the R7 and the 600 EXRT was on the R5 on the ground. And what we do is on the transmitter we just hit that link button that's on the far left side. So we've hit it once, it doesn't do anything on the transmitter, but if you press and hold it, it'll go into link shot mode. And then you just tap it again to put it into master, and you'll see the display goes green there. And on the other unit, if we hit the link button on the far left side once, it goes into sort of flash linked modes. You can scroll across to link shot, or you can do the same thing and actually press and hold. And then we're going to go down to slave on this one, and we should get. Yes. Alright, you can now see they are linked. We've got the green light both there and there. What I was having trouble with there just for a moment was the channel. So I'm now in channel 10 on both of them and they are linked. They were on channel 1. They were both on channel 1, but the problem is there's a lot of interference currently on channel 1. You can check this really quickly by hitting scan on either unit, and it will scan through all the channels to see which one has the most interference and which one's best to use. And once the scan's gone through, you'll see the results. And you can see here on channel 10 has the most clear band. Now that the two are linked, if this is on the R7 and I hit the trigger, this one will fire the camera. Part of the reason we booked this cross-country venue was this water feature. So it's quite a shallow water obstacle that the horses could jump in and then run across, and it would have created some really amazing, sort of very splashy, dramatic images. Unfortunately, these horses have never encountered obstacles like this, and they weren't particularly confident or keen to get in. With a bit of gentle encouragement, we thought maybe they would slowly kind of warm to it, but they had absolutely no interest in it. And sometimes you've just got to let things go and, you know, take your cues from the animal and not force them into something they don't want to do. Perhaps with a bit more time, we might have been able to persuade them to come in. And that is pretty typical of working with animals. You might have the best ideas, but if they don't want to play ball, you've just got to run with it. At this point, we ran out of time at the cross-country venue, so we packed up, loaded the horses onto the truck, and headed back to Christie's stables. While I was setting up the lights outside the stables, Chrissy's dog Vinny very kindly was sitting around directly under the light, so I couldn't pass up the opportunity to take some test shots to get my settings right, but also create some lovely images of her very characterful dog. If you're going to work with lights, it would be ideal to set the lights up and then have the horse brought in afterwards, so you're not setting it up in front of the horse. This way the horse can kind of assess the new thing in its space, get an idea of whether it's a threat or not, kind of get a feel of whether it's happy with it being there, and then eventually it will just ignore that new item. In this case, I didn't do that. I made the mistake of setting that up in front of this horse. This is Cash. And Cash wasn't particularly happy about that. He snorted his disapproval. And when we opened the door to his stable, he would kind of snort it and then close it. He was quite unhappy about this new thing in his area and had wanted nothing to do with it. I thought a little bit of time and some gentle persuasions with some treats might help, but Cash wasn't particularly confident with this. So we moved on to something else and took a different horse outside where I'd already set up the light. You can see Iona walking the horse around the light quite a few times, and it just gets him used to the idea of it being there and sort of settles him down in the situation. This guy was absolutely not fussed by the light whatsoever. Couldn't care less. And he's a bit of a joker. He was holding water in his mouth until just the point where I wanted to take a picture, and then just dropped it all in one go.
Yeah.
As we came into the stables, I saw this end of the stable building, and it looked kind of interesting, a bit of texture and some plants in the background. But it just looked a bit busy and a little bit unflattering. So we decided to move out away from that and just shoot out in the open. You can see Christy in the corner of the frame here, and she's just shaking a little bucket that is full of these little treats that this horse absolutely loves. So we're doing that to try and get his ears to perk forward and look towards where the sound is coming from. Because that's what you want. Ideally, you want the ears forward. It makes the horse look quite alert, and it makes for a much more engaging photo.
To turn around this way a little bit. So if you look towards me, Iona. Quite close to his chest. Yeah, there. Yeah.
You see this area, I'm just trying to create some interesting shapes
that's perfect.
Between the subject and the horse. We experimented with a few different things, and each time when we want to reset and change the position, we just take the horse for a little walk around and bring it back and put it in the place we want it. That way the horse doesn't get too antsy and too sort of agitated, because if it stays still too long, it gets a bit bored.
Yeah. And if you kind of keep your eye towards the light, horses are so big, you have to go so far away.
In order to get some of the wider shots, I did have to step quite far back with the 70-200, and part of the reason is I wanted a little bit more compression between the subject and the background, so I am stepping back and zooming in and using that longer focal length. Much like any kind of portraiture, longer focal lengths are a little bit more flattering, and it also helps to get some more separation, because we'll get a bit of a shallower depth of field that way as well.
Okay, that's all right, that's great. I'm gonna come in for some like tight shots just of his beautiful face. Hello.
He's like, oh hi, have you got any snacks?
I haven't got any snacks for you.
I'm not getting any. So can I eat that camera? No.
Can I give him a snack? See?
Yeah, just make sure your hand's flat.
That's flat hand.
Go.
No. You dropped most of them on the floor, you muppet.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Right, if we could go around and just stop a bit further back. That way I can get more light on him and his face.
Oh, hello, boy. Hello.
Stop being so rude. He's like, I am the star of the show.
Oh, that's really nice.
Oh wow, that was so slick. That's lovely. Yeah. So Ione, if you kind of lead into him, yeah, that's brilliant.
Oh my god.
Yeah, that's still good. That's still good. You can lead in this side. Not directly in front, behind me, mate. Just. Oh, I can't see Iona now. That's pretty. That's really pretty. When working with flash for the portraiture, what I did was I set up the lights and I set up the exposure for the ambient light first. So the lights were set up, I turned the flash transmitter off, set up my exposure so I figure out what kind of shutter speed and aperture I need, and then I turn the flashes back on. And that basically sets up my ambient light. So I set my exposure for the ambient light, I want the clouds to come down a little bit, I want it a little bit darker, and then I'm going to illuminate the horse. So what I do is I'll then turn the flash trigger on and then adjust the flashes accordingly. I am, I think, using high-speed sync at this point. With high-speed sync, it is sometimes beneficial just to have the flashes in TTL mode because it kind of helps. But if you are using it in manual, it's just a bit of trial and error to get the flash at the right power. A few tips for photographing horses, a few things to look out for. The ears should be facing forward and kind of up, makes the horses look much more alert. You don't want the whites of the eyes in the image. It kind of makes them look a bit freaked out. And the mouth should be closed. If they're sort of running and there's motion in it, you kind of want the tail to be flowing out the back and not sort of tucked between the legs. So in terms of camera settings, we tried a few different things. I've gone for really fast shutter speed to freeze the action, so 0.002 of a second, and I'm leaving the ISO in automatic to let the camera do some of that work, just because the light's changing and the environment's changing as I'm going. But then I've done some slow shutter speed stuff, so I've gone down to 0.50 of a second to try and capture some of that motion. And you really get a sense of the speed of the horse is traveling, and it's a lot more, it allows you to get away with a bit more of a boring background because that motion kind of creates an interesting background itself. For the flash stuff, the portraiture we've done with a little bit more considered time. I've set up Bowen's big lights, so they're studio lights. They're battery powered. They're much more powerful than I'd get out of a speed light. A speed light simply wouldn't cover the size of a horse, especially when you're putting it in a softbox, because that takes out some of the light as well. Another thing I did while I was out there was use the slow-mo video capabilities of the R7. This is something I wanted to try out to see how it coped, particularly with the autofocus during slow-mo, and it coped beautifully. And I do think this is something that stills photographers often neglect, is the opportunity to just create very small clips of video to cut together, even if it's just a couple of seconds each clip, and then you smash together a sort of 10-15 second video. It's great for social media content, and it just looks amazing. And even if you don't have a lot of video experience, if you put it in slow-mo, everything looks beautiful. So to set that up, we need to go over to the video mode. So we hit the switch over to the video mode, hit the menu, and then in the first camera menu there's high frame rate video. We can just press enable on that, and it automatically, there you see, goes to 119.9 frames per second. We can have that in IPB or IPB Lite. With IPB Lite, it's just a more compressed version that allows you a little bit more recording time on your memory cards, as it won't take up so much space, but IPB will be slightly higher quality. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Raj K. You can find me on YouTube and on Instagram at rajk.photo. Thank you very much to Iona and Christy for their wonderful help and skill and talent on the horses. And Jade has been helping me today on this shoot as well, filming me, as it was pretty hard to do this single-handedly. Thanks very much for watching. I hope to see you again. Goodbye.